Oh. Oh. Hariom, and greetings from Niagara Falls. After 2 weeks, it feels good to be back in Niagara Falls after 2 weeks. Our older son Vyasa is not well physically. We're suspecting he has the norovirus. Am I saying that correctly? The norovirus? We hope the rest of us don't get this. So I was observing him. He was more thoughtful as he was physically unwell. And today, as I was giving him a bath and feeding him, it was almost like he was being nostalgic. So he'd asked me to read a book to him. It was a book from 2 years ago that his classmates and him wrote. I'm going to read to you some of the pages from this book. Can you all see this? It's called The Door. This is a junior kindergarten book. Here's a page, A section. My friends and I turned into butterflies. My friends and I join ninja school. We turn into cheetahs and go really fast. If someone were to ask you, what is the purpose? What is the vision of our community? How would you respond to that? How would you answer that accurately? Please share in the chat. What is our purpose? What is our vision? Happiness. Good answer. To show people peace, that peace is possible. Good answer. To feel and share joyousness. Good answer. I would respond with, on a scholarly side, the purpose, the vision of our community is to be Brahma. Just like these JK students became mermaids and ninjas and cheetahs, for us to become infinity. Now, a sign of one becoming less finite and more infinite is inclusivity. And as I think back to all of the wellness workshops we have facilitated, and as I look at all of you, I feel we are working hard and smart towards being infinite because we are being inclusive. Infinity and inclusivity are synonyms. To be part of this community, there are 0 barriers to entry. If there is, it's coming from an individual. And our mentorship Sangha is a great expression of inclusivity, just training for infinity. Last month, our mentees and mentors had their orientation, which really was about leadership. Some years ago, I spoke on International Women's Day on leadership. The subject was leading with courage. And the dominant thought that I shared was, we tend to make leadership in reference to others, but leadership with courage is leadership in reference to yourself. You are a leader because it's right. You are not a leader because of a follower. And I'm sharing this because our relationships, they are all training for us to become independent. And this is directing us to this evening's workshop, this month's wellness workshop. One of the most significant challenges we all face is anger. When I ask people, do you have an anger problem? Almost everyone has their hands up. The opposite of anger is acceptance. Whatever you accept, you tend not to be angry towards. And in our community, in our culture, a powerful reminder for us to accept and so not to be angry. A powerful reminder for us that relationships are for training us is stane. Stane means all is as all is. This wellness workshop, our sharer, is very much a practitioner of all is as all is. In a light way, like Master Ugwe shared, there are no accidents. In a heavy way, all that happens to us is to direct us to become more independent. Happy to be with all of you. Our community is very inclusive. I never feel judged when I'm with all of you. Team, please continue.
Hariom Vikji and fellow seekers. I have the pleasure of introducing Ryan, who will be our speaker today. Ryan was born in Michigan and is the oldest of 3 boys. He spent the majority of his time growing up in rural Minnesota. His parents' work ethic inspired his journey through academia, and he was blessed to be able to spend the majority of his youth playing in the outdoors, whether at home or exploring the USA with his family, and he was strongly encouraged to be active year-round in extracurricular activities. Being fortunate to travel around the world in his youth, volunteer as a camp counselor for children with heart diseases for many summers, participate in mission work in the Dominican, and his pursuit of the American dream were some of the major contributing factors that led to his decision to become a pharmacist and later a physician. His journey is a tale of success, followed by trials and tribulations testing his inner strength, his sense of purpose, and has led to his growth in his faith that is stronger than anything he could have ever imagined. Ryan is a board-certified emergency room medicine physician where he finds fulfillment engaging with individuals during times of need, offering medical help and a listening ear. He currently lives with his wife and 2 goofy dogs in a little town tucked away in the Ozark Mountains, with many acres of land to hike, bike, play, praise, and be joyous. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Ryan over several conversations, and I've truly been appreciative of his kindness and sincerity, and I found his path to be very inspirational. I hope you all can find something to take away from it. Thank you, Ryan, for taking the time to speak with us today. I turn it over to you.
Hariom Vikji, thank you so much. Beyond humbled that you all asked me to be here. Before I get to my first thing, you made me laugh immediately, Vikji, because my only anger is towards technology. And you said what you don't accept. And as you'll hear in my story, eventually I had to renounce that to find happiness. So I'd like to say first to everyone who's younger than me here, you are beyond inspirational, because if you think I'm worth listening to, you are already so much further ahead than I ever was at your age. So bless you for being here, and please spread your grace and your word to others that you think need it when they ask for it. And so I'll start. Obviously first, without God and without my family, without my wife, I wouldn't be where I am today. And my wife is not going to be a part of this story because she's the last bit of it, but she definitely has been here the last 7 years, which has been the biggest transformation. With that, I'll start with my story. So as Mukul had stated, I was born in Michigan. I'm the oldest of three boys. Nothing special about Michigan. Well, at least where we were from. And I had my middle brother was there until I was 5, and then we moved to Minnesota. And we originally moved to a town that was a big suburb. And after 2 years, my parents decided that the best thing for us was to be in a small rural town so we could get small classroom sizes, because they preferred to drive over 2 hours a day just so that we could get that kind of classroom size. Now, granted, it also gave us the beauty of living out in nature, and that was something that I didn't get to really realize how lucky I was until way, way later in my life. So we moved to a rural town, and this is where my life really started, because that's when I started becoming who I was. I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And immediately I didn't fit in, despite being well, in spite, honestly, and because of being in athletics, I was good. In academia, I was good. And in the arts, at least in the music side of things, I was good. But I was a city boy in a farm town, and I was resented for that. And it was tough for me because I had always had a love for those who had been bullied, and all of a sudden I was the bullied one. And it was a weird time because no one knew that for almost my whole life I was depressed. And I mean, no one. My mom, the first time she ever found out, couldn't believe how long I was crying to God downstairs in the basement, in the middle of the night, looking up to the sky, wondering why people didn't feel the way I did. Or at least I thought that. And so we fast forward through high school, thrive in all the A's, academia, athletics, and arts, but fail completely in God and fail completely in the social constructs that we call interacting with each other. And I told my mom towards the end of my high school life that I didn't believe in God, that there's no way God exists, and I believe in science, and if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. And so she had me go to our pastor. We went to church every single week. We went to Wednesday Bible class. I sang in the choir there. And for years, my pastor knew that I was very adamantly, there is no God. And, I don't even remember the conversation he had with me, but I do remember him just kind of smiling at me, knowing someday I would. And so I go to college, not letting anyone know how down I am, being someone that was unable to establish connections very well. I think I had one real friend in high school. And so then I go to college, and because I was very self-aware that I was a tiny fish in a puddle where I grew up, I didn't want to be a tiny fish in a big sea, pond, ocean, whatever. And so I intentionally chose a pretty small regional school because I was afraid. So I went to the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, despite being offered much larger programs. There's no way I could do it. I was so afraid. I knew what my mind was going to take me to if I didn't succeed socially. And so I went to college, and of course, then I was no longer successful athletically or the arts, because that's a whole nother step. Even when you go to a nowhere college, I was a small fish, but that was a big ego hit, and which was important in life for all of us, I guess. And so then I just had academics, and I was striving there, but still failing completely otherwise. And so I think it was my second year of college. I went home almost every weekend, and finally one day started drinking alcohol and I can't remember if I texted or called, it didn't matter. I reached out to one of my friends and said, I'm going to kill myself. And I found a gun in my parents' house, and I was not going to kill myself, but I was at that point that was the only way I figured out how to get help. And I waited for them to come, and I shot in the air, and then they took me to the hospital, and I went to inpatient psych for a week, and I did the things, and I didn't listen to anything. I was arrogant and entrenched in my beliefs, and just figured this was just, a thing I'd get over. And I took the medication for a couple months, and then I got over it. At least I thought. And I continued on in school with no faith system, no support structure other than my family and my belief that my success would come from my intelligence and that everything else would follow suit. And so towards the end of my undergrad, I have family that basically encourages me, family friends, I should say, not my family, because we have no medicine in my family. I had a family friend who was a pharmacist, and he said, hey, you know, you like teaching, you like sciences, maybe you should consider being a pharmacist. I went to work as a pharmacy tech during undergrad, and the truth was that my greed made me look at being a pharmacist and say, yeah, I'll make a bunch of money. That looks easy. I'll go do that. Not because of anything else. And so I got into pharmacy school right away, being, you know, sometimes the enemy is success because then you don't learn. And so I was continuing to be successful, and I got right into pharmacy school. And my first year towards the end of pharmacy school was my first kind of brush up with something more. And I'm sorry, I took notes because I always forget parts of my story. There was only a teeny little thing. I was blessed right before I went to undergrad to get to go to Singapore. My aunt taught in Egypt for over a decade, and then in Singapore for about a decade. And so she took me to Singapore, Japan, Taiwan, and Indonesia. And that was my first experience to see poverty, like real poverty, which was my first true eye opener before this inpatient cycling. So sorry about that, miss. So then move forward, I get into pharmacy school, and then I have a roommate who is very religious, and she goes on a yearly medical mission trip to the Dominican on the Haiti border. And she invited me. I was like, sure, that sounds cool. Let's do it. And that was my first real experience with medicine. And it just really like touched me to see all these people giving up their time and truly actually money, like they were paying for it too, right? And they were giving up their income, and it really blew me away to see this. And then what I saw too was my second experience with true poverty. I mean, these people had homes that had no doors, that were just dirt floors, that had pigs and cattle walking through their home with their children. It really opened my eyes, you know. And so I said, I have to do this. What was I doing, you know? And so then I decided I was going to get into medical school. And so I had to appropriately study for the MCAT and do all those things. And it just happened to be that I got into medical school right after I graduated from pharmacy school. I met my ex-wife in pharmacy school. I got married in medical school. It was just standard medical school, standard Ryan continuing to succeed, at least academically. And I started to learn how to talk to people because these were people like me. And so I just happened to eventually learn. I called it, I was faking it till I made it. That was the only way it ever worked for me. But get into medical school, get married in medical school. And again, I let greed guide me the wrong way. I was, in my mind, thought critical care would be what would be cool for me and what it would fit for my personality. But I didn't really seek out vigilantly what it really was, and also what really would be in accordance with my soul when it came to what specialty I should choose. And so I was definitely persuaded to go into anesthesiology because people knew that that got into critical care. But unfortunately, Ryan thought that's a lot of money and that's really easy, again, when I saw what it potentially was in my mind. So I, of course, crisscrossed the wrong way again. And so I go to residency where me and my ex at that, my ex now, had chosen to go. And first year of residency is just what they call categorical, meaning I did all sorts of specialties. It wasn't anesthesiology. And the second year of anesthesiology, I'll never forget this story. One of my best friends in anesthesiology residency, we walked out from work one day, and it's just a joke. It's definitely not truth about anesthesiology, but this was us very naive. And we walked out, and he looked at me and he goes, do you feel like a monkey could have done what we did today? And I look back, I'm like, yeah, and maybe better. Now it turns out that's because we weren't aware of what was going on behind us with our attending and stuff. So have faith, you're being taken care of by very smart people. But it came to the point during that first year of anesthesiology, my second year of residency, that I realized that this was what I called it was a disillusion. I was disillusioned. What I thought I was going into medicine and what I was doing were completely mismatches. And so I actually did discuss this with my significant other at the time. And at the time, she very astutely pointed out what most of us would point out. I shouldn't say most of us, but what I think a lot of people, especially in Western culture, would agree with her argument, which she said, this is your second career already, and you're going to make a lot of money. Do you really hate it, or do you just not like it? And I said, I just don't like it. And so I let greed guide that decision again. So we move forward and we try to have a kid. We have a stillbirth at 28 weeks, which, being busy, takes you away from emotional things sometimes. And I clearly wasn't there. I just, that time period is very, the memories aren't really there. I was working 120 hours a week. And so when that happened, I think that was the beginning of the end for us. And later on, she was led astray. And those two things really broke me because of who I was for my whole life, One thing I realized as I've thought about this talk many times was because of my failures socially for most of my life, because of arts and athletics no longer being there to support me when I was down socially, I bought in a lot to that significant others. I was dependent on the significant other to raise me up for what my self-worth was at that time. Just because that was my coping mechanism, I guess, and it really was. We won't get into it, but it really was. And so yeah, it was hard for me to even comprehend because I never knew we weren't good. And the next thing I knew, I had the person that I was ready to spend the rest of my life with tell me they were done with me. I'm like, done. And there was nothing I could do about it. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And at some point, I don't remember when, but at some point, 24/7 had a guaranteed plan how I was going to end my life. And I thought about 24/7 for months and months. And the thing I can laugh about now is I had two dogs then, and they were both my dogs. And during our fighting during the divorce proceedings, she wanted one of my dogs. And I said, I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to give her the dogs. And I also couldn't do it to my family, who is amazing. But that still didn't change those thoughts. And I was, everyone was aware of how down I was, but they weren't aware of the fact that I was thinking about ending my life 24/7, and I had access to my plan. And so finally one day I said to myself, this is not by any means the way to go. This is not medical recommendations, but this is what Ryan did. And I hope my whole story gives someone something. I decided one day, drug addicts, they seem to at least find something in that. Maybe that'll bring me from right here, because this is where I was and ready to die, and this is where everyone is. Maybe I can get here. And I did. I did it for a long time, successfully. Had some of the highest marks I've ever had in academia. But it didn't fix a thing other than, push it away a little bit for a second. And before that, I had wasted my time with other, I was tried alcohol first, and I tried smoking cannabis. I didn't try anything else, but who cares, right? It doesn't matter. I tried something. And I'll tell you a fun story when we get there, but it doesn't matter what it is. It's something, it's intention. So too long of a period goes by, and then I'm depressed about using too now. Walgreens sues me because I had taken scholarship money from them while I was in school, and I promised to either work for them or pay it back. And they sue me right when I'm going through the divorce I can't afford to the woman I didn't want to leave. And now I have a drug problem. I'm becoming stereotypical. That was another ego smash. I was like, oh my God, I'm a stereotype too. So I'm going to counseling. I'm crying every day to my program director and my chief residents, and yet I still don't tell them what I'm doing. And eventually, what I found out I got, according to rehab, is the F blank it's. Yes. It means you try to get caught. And at some point in my life during that, I couldn't believe I wasn't getting caught. And so I did everything I could to be caught without like standing in front of someone doing it in front of them. And so the day that they finally came to me, I literally like got down to my knees and said thank you to my program director. Because it was a long road. And before I went to rehab, despite being a man who always was incredibly what I thought kind-hearted, I'd always wanted the world to be by my rules. I broke plenty of rules. I was not a perfect kid. I had a record, but not anything real enough to keep me from getting into the things I told you about. And so I was a very, very arrogant, entrenched, know-it-all, judger, greedy person. And when I went to rehab, before anyone talked to me, I went into this intake room and I put my eyes up to the air as an atheist and said, okay, God, I clearly don't know anything. And everything I've been saying, and all the judging I've been doing, I'm removing it all. I'm open to everything and everything because I know nothing. And then immediately, he showed himself to me so many freaking times. I'm sorry, but so many times. Immediately. And probably one of the biggest problems I ever had was ruminating on the past and perseverating about it. And the first thing my mom handed me from someone I didn't know and she didn't know and just happened to be by when she got the call that she had to immediately leave Florida and fly up to Iowa because something was wrong with her son. The woman handed her a cross with a 3-sentence saying on it and said, I don't know what's going on, but I think you need this. And, you know, I was a man that didn't believe in anything. But when I was staring at these 3 lines, I was like, wow, that's exactly my problem. And it said, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So many other things happened. Almost immediately, 2 days later, I tell this story of this man who was at residency in Iowa. He was the neurosurgery chief. He worked a lot more hours than I did. He was like 160. Shh, no, we don't work more than 80, I think the rule is. um, and he was amazing. He had 2 or 3 young kids, all under the age of like 5. He was the happiest man in the world. Joy just like exuded from him, and he remembered everything about everyone. You would talk to him, and 3 weeks later he would remember what you guys talked about the next time you saw him, and you're just like, wow, how does this guy have it? And then he calls me like 2 days into rehab and he says, Ryan, I've been asking everyone, where are you? And they finally told me. And he's like, I hope it's okay that I called you. And I said, of course, man. I'm like, I can't believe you called. Why are you calling me? And he goes, I have to tell you something. He goes, I was an alcoholic. And he goes, I didn't find God for a long time. He goes, you're going to find God. And I want you to know that I'm here for you, man. And I'm going to always be in your corner. And I'm like, there's just constant stuff like that, that in rehab, in the secular, like Vivechi says, they call it synchronicity. For those that believe in a higher power, they say, oh no, sorry. For those that don't believe in God, they call it the world. It's a small world. For those who believe in a higher power but aren't willing to say God, they say synchronicity. And for those that believe in God, God works in mysterious ways. And he just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. Meditation and rehab, a lot of really, really wise teachers who were unbeknownst to me and only upon a lot of retrospective review these last few years were Buddhists and Hindu teachers teaching how to live the way. So that really finally made me go from atheist to believer. But the rest of the story is about how I went from believer to knower, because I tell people now that no, I don't believe in the creator. I know the creator exists. And so fast forward, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm out of rehab. I'm going through recovery. And I am like, I don't even know if I want to be a doctor. I'm going to try to do a long-term medical mission because that's what drove me to do medicine. Let's go do it. Excuse me. And so the process goes through and I end up getting accepted to go work at a Methodist mission hospital in Kenya, Maua, Kenya. And I'm set to start in January of, I always get this wrong, it's either 2017 or 16. But unprepared Ryan showed up after a 38-hour trip and after an 8-hour drive to a country that had been under a national physician strike for 20 days and all the hospitals in the country were shut down. And I was going to Kenya to this mission hospital just to try to help their equivalents of PAs and NPs teach some anesthesiology. So when I got there and the only doctor of the hospital of 150 beds that had over 300 patients looked at me, hit the CMO and said, Ryan, I've been taking care of all these people for 20 days. Can you help me? This anesthesia resident, like, I don't know what to do anything. I'm like, yes, I'll help. And so I started doing things that I had never seen in my life, never read about in my life. He taught me side by side. I had YouTube teach me a lot, and life taught me a lot. And it was an unbelievable experience with a lot of death, because of third world not having what we have. People died in front of my hands because I didn't have a ventilator, or I didn't have oxygen, or I didn't have blah, blah, blah. It made me start really, really valuing the sanctity of life then, especially. I had seen death already, but it was starting to smack me in the face there. And I realized I did love this. I did love helping people. I didn't care if it was for money or not, that I did have some sort of gift with this interaction, and that I needed to become an emergency physician if I was going to be able to do this on the long term. And so I came back to the States after visiting India while I was in Kenya, and then backpacking in New Zealand for a month, which everyone should. It's a great country. And it did teach me so much about what God is, just being in nature and removing myself from my phone for both that 6 months in Kenya, but also that other extra month in New Zealand, that 7 months being away from phone, social media, being in nature, being in the real, changed me, and to see that really helped me appreciate the European style of a gap year. I didn't have that, and it's something I saw that could provide a lot of value for our youth. So when I get back from the States, I want to become an ER doctor. So I try to boost my resume, and I end up getting a position in the Department of Corrections for the Utah State Prison. And so I go work at the state prison as a physician in their infirmary in Salt Lake City for an unplanned, very short period of time, because I was almost immediately offered a residency down in Florida for a second year position in emergency medicine, because I basically got some credit from my previous residency. So I ended up taking that and kind of got distracted again with being busy, and just went down the residency track again, and everything was great, obviously, from a me standpoint, but the God part kind of took a second seat, and or a back seat. And I found my love of my life and the woman who has got me to where I am today while I was down there. Turns out she's a Michigan girl too. And then we moved to the Ozarks after I graduate, and I worked for 2 years in a critical access hospital in the ER there. And I started seeing a trend, a really sad trend that I thought I was just seeing in the cities while I was working there for those 6-10 years of med school and residencies in 3 completely different cities, and then different worlds. And now being somewhere where I thought maybe could be even protected from it, and just seeing the despair. It just, I realized, even though I was giving, like I had a third chance at life, I was giving everything I could in the ER. I realized something was still missing, and I realized, oh yeah, maybe it's that God thing, Ryan. Maybe you should find God. And so I didn't really know where to go, though, because I had always had a problem with the dogma of Christianity. There was some things for me that I felt maybe were the word of man instead of the word of God. And I just wasn't sure if I could go back to the church, but I didn't want to walk away from God. And so I kept saying I was spiritual, but that wasn't enough. I needed ritual. And so me and my wife went to Rome and Athens for our honeymoon, me intentionally picking them because of their historical nature, only in that I wanted to be inspired by what man could do. I wanted man to show me that they could do something so huge and that I could do something so little. And so I went there to be inspired and to inspire her. And it inspired me to come back to really fight for the homeless and to really fight for our youth, because of what I saw there, both how they had it kind of figured out a little bit, and both being inspired by what man has done. And so, me being who I am, being a very, oh, if I don't see it, I don't believe it, even though I believe in viruses and fungus and bacteria and UV radiation and gamma radiation, for some reason I had to see God to believe in God, despite everything I just said. Technology has proven that we don't have to see it for it to be real. And yet I was sitting here still wanting for something to see. And so I went on a spiritual retreat. I'm sure some have heard of ayahuasca, and I did do that. And I did that because I was sitting here as a man that felt that I had a third chance at life and felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I didn't know the right way, even though I was still intermittently meditating. I wasn't doing it daily anymore at the time. I just didn't know if I was doing enough. And I wanted to really find out if God really was at this other side of things that I had been reading about. I wanted to know if I was doing enough. The short story is I didn't see anything, but I felt like I got knowledge that I was doing okay. And so I came back home and I was like, okay, all right, that didn't do much. Other than it made me feel good. It made me feel like, okay, maybe I'm doing okay. But then the important thing came, and that I was out kayaking on the river with one of my friends one day, shortly after this experience. And I went to lay down on the riverbed, and it was a sunny day, and he was way behind me. So I'm just resting. And I closed my eyes in the sun, and I have this vision of this being that appeared to, at the time, I thought was a female. And on a lot of review, I think it was Shiva, reaching down from me. And I open my eyes and nothing's there. I close my eyes again and there it is. And then some mandala effects occur with the Om symbol and the swastika, and some other symbols that I know I've seen, but I don't know. And then it turns into this lock to the gate of what I assume is heaven, with what looked to be like ancestors. It was all shades of figures that looked like and felt like they were excited that I was there. And then I opened my eyes and I closed and it wasn't there anymore. But it was so real that I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I sought out these symbols, found that they appeared to be Sanskrit and associated with Hinduism. And then I sought out Hinduism 101. And then I obsessively listened to Vivekji way too many times on Spotify, because the first thing he said about Swami Chinmayananda was that he had studied all these religions, of which I had done in undergrad too, because I wanted to prove them all wrong. Was that they were all seeking out the same thing, basically through a slightly different path. And I was like, yeah, except mine seems so close-minded. I was like, God, I loved what Vivekji said. And it was so true to what my whole life had been telling me, that God doesn't get to come on my terms, that I've got to go on God's terms, that I've got to go based on all these fables that are in all these wise texts. They're in all of them. And if you read them, they all tell you the same thing. And if you want to try differently, good luck. It's not going to work, probably. And so listening to him, all this experience, truly dedicating myself after that vision to 100% knowing. And I say, if there's, my mother asked me, Ryan, what changed after that? Like, why is that so much different? I said, Mom, it went from having someone always looking over my shoulder physically to always having someone look over my shoulder. Like, I know he's watching, and I cannot not do what's right all the time, because I know I will not get away with it. And the only thing I can do is do what these books say, because I have been doing them, and all I get is more and more from it. Every time I give, I get more. It's ridiculous. It feels like a cheat code that we have this. So I'm probably super over. I would love to share just one thing. I had a ton of, well, actually, I'm gonna say one quote and then I'll be done. Jim Carrey said something that I was listening to recently that I think is so good when it comes to what Vivekji talks about: possession, power, pleasure. You can think those things will give you happiness. And here's what Jim Carrey's quote is: I wish everyone would get everything they ever wanted, because then they'd realize how much it doesn't work. That's all I ever thought about before. Let me use a quote from a series that also changed my life, Surviving Death. The last episode is about reincarnation. It's on Netflix. Episode 1, 4, 5, 6. I think it will inspire a lot. The first thing, so before I give you the quote, I had to figure out a way to deal with kind of fairness with death. I see death from age 0 to 100, and you can be healthy or you can be sick and you can die 0 to 100. And when I had to start trying to figure out how it was fair that a 0-year-old is dying, it really did put my faith to test. And the only thing I could figure out was reincarnation. And that the fairness is that if you die young, not only does the young one, presumably in my mind, this is the only way I could justify the fairness, was that that being had learned its last thing it needed to learn, and it was done, and it was good to go. You know, they get to go back with the one. But I loved what the quote says from the beginning of Surviving Death. This woman has this experience that she's dead for a while, kayaking in the Chile, down in Chile, and she's an orthopedic surgeon. And she has this experience where basically her ancestors tell her that she's going back, but that her son is going to die when he's very young, and he does. And when she asks why, she's told beauty becomes of all things. And that leads to a wonderful movie called Collateral Beauty, which honestly was something that did change me early on with Will Smith. The fairness of losing a kid, the fairness of having someone do that to you, the fairness of all the other things. Something that was really something I didn't include in the story that I forgot to, because I know it's a long one, is early on in rehab, listening to everyone's story. I didn't say they're all different than me. What I heard was they all look different than me. They all come from different places than me, but they all think just like me, and we're all the same. And that oneness became very apparent too. So I guess all I can say is the beauty becomes of all things and collateral beauty. And I started trying to see how could there be beauty in this horribleness. And I think even when I've had a terrible, I had a terrible thing happen to me in October. It could have been perceived as terrible, but I immediately thought of it as the wonderful thing because I thought I saw opportunity in it, not disaster in it, I guess is a good way to describe it. I hope that's kind of helpful. So publicly, I mean, this is probably the most public, but I would say I was, as soon as I started my emergency medicine residency, like feeling blessed to be offered that position again, and feel like I maybe gotten the opportunity to find vocation and avocation meeting. I started when I saw it in the eyes of the patient that needed it, I shared it with them. I had no fear of that because I knew that transparency with such similar experiences could show a level of empathy that was hard for the patient to otherwise see. Well, okay, so I steal a lot of stuff from Vivekji, honestly. I really do. Like his whole meaningful mornings, he says he had talked about like in the morning, bow immediately, then chant while you drive and touch while you're at work and lift with your eyes and praise before you eat. I think I've been doing that every day and it feels great. And just like things like that, so I really, for me, because I do believe that God speaks through us. So when I hear Vivekji say that, I'm like, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. Like God, the number of times that I have started cheating, and then a song or Vivekshi or a patient like clearly is like, this is God telling you, Ryan. It's so often, so it's so easy for me to just do, you know, like whatever is recommended by the book or from the wise teacher, it's just I do. But if you want to get like something that's like more concrete than that, I think meditation is absolutely phenomenal. If you want some, what I would say is some pretty interesting medical science stuff going on, that I think can get you potentially some really meaningful life changing, lifting experiences. I think what's really interesting, if you can't do meditation on a daily basis, because I think meditation, like the original like monks and Vedas and all them, right? That's how they got this stuff, I think, right? So if you can do that, it seems like everyone seems to agree there's something unbelievable, amazing that comes from that. And I really do try to do that now on a daily. But if you can't, which I think is really hard for a lot of people, something that I think is really interesting is they have these water deprivation tanks. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for people to have the baby step into the more long-term consistent meditation process. And I think that only because these deprivation tanks appear to get you the end result of what meditation can do on a daily basis. I think the best thing that I found, so I was in Betty Ford Clinic, and the thing that they did a really good job of for me and for the patients was getting the family and friends in Al-Anon, specifically speaking to addiction. And oh, by the way, I was going to give the fun like intention. There was someone there who was an addict who had previously had other addiction to a substance and now is there because they gained 300 pounds from Oreos. So it's about intention. It's not about what you do. But I think Al-Anon really is important for those who are not going through it, because if you're not going through it, maybe you still think the same way that the person is thinking that's going through it, but maybe you haven't done it. And so you don't know some of those other things. And I think Al-Anon does a really good job of bringing it together to be able to approach and support and not make them feel judged, because I think in addiction, everyone is afraid of being judged. They are already feeling like a social enigma, and that's like their last little thing before it breaks their back. So
Adiós.